we've got a great lineup today, and one of those awesome people is here, William Bond. If you got to hear him speak yesterday, you know that this guy knows his stuff. And so let me just put a plug in for him. He is the permaculture consultant now. He's the son of Billy and Michelle Bond, if you watch Permapastures Farm, which I know that, you know, with Permapasture Farm, you see Billy on there because Billy's kind of the face of that. This is the reason that there's a Permapastures Farm YouTube channel, because he's the one that got all that started. His dad's just always been on the front page. So, but they're both a great family. So William, when we bought our farm in 2021, I found them on YouTube. I reached out to William. He did a phone consultation for me it was like, we were on the phone for probably about an hour, I guess. And then I was like, okay, you have to come to my house. So he came to our farm in the summer of 2021, mainly because we bought this farm and I knew that I wanted to do like regenerative farming. I knew I wanted to do permaculture. I had no idea where to start. I had no idea what to do, and I was having like analysis paralysis, and I was ready to give up, and I hadn't even gotten started yet. This guy came, he was at our place for a couple days. He did pictures, he drew me maps, he gave me a whole plan. He asked me what my goals were. He took all of mine and Randy's hopes and dreams into consideration. He laid out a whole plan for us and said, okay, do this first, do this next, put this here, think about this input. He laid everything out for me, and I'm so appreciative for that, because I was seriously ready to give up. And he made it all right for me. So if you need a consultation, if you want to know what to do with your place, if you're brand new to this, and even if you're not brand new to this, you still don't know what to do, call this guy, because he can totally hook you up with what you need to do. Now, all of that being said, he does have a permaculture consultation certificate. What is that?
Permaculture design certificate.
Yes, he has that. But he has also been taking this class put on by Dr. Elaine Ingham. All three of them, you and your parents, have done this class, and he's going to teach you today about how to have healthy soil. So give it up for William Bond.
Thank you so much, Shelley. That is not deserved. She is amazing. Thank you so much. Not everybody understands the importance of their soil health. So by a show of hands, and if you raise your hand, keep your hand up, how many people have lost plants that they planted to pests? All right, how many have lost them to disease? How many have had sick animals such as pink eye or hoof rot or bumblefoot or anything like that? All right, all of those are a result of having poor soil. Believe it or not, this is the only thing that permaculture class I taught yesterday, none of that even matters compared to this right here. This is going to be the basis of everything on your homestead. If it fails or if it thrives, it's going to be because of your soil. Minus like natural catastrophe and stuff like that. The soil ain't gonna stop an earthquake. But this is how everything works. This is the soil food web made popular by Dr. Elaine Ingham. Check out her classes on YouTube. She has free classes on YouTube. She also has like paid courses you can take. There are some paid courses where you can learn how to use the microscope and you can study your own soil or other people's soils as well. But this is the soil food web right here. And we're gonna just briefly go over this real quick, and then we'll look at some of these specific characters. So here's your plants. These plants have roots. I can use my little pointer right here actually. There we go. These plants have roots, and whenever the plant needs anything, it shoots down exudates into the soil. The exudates are basically simple sugars with a recipe book in it. The recipe includes everything that this plant is needing, and these guys come and eat the exudates, and at the same time they get the recipe book, so they're told like, okay, in exchange for this sugar, you need to go get this, this, and this for me. So these guys go to your clay, sand, and silt, and they start breaking those down and deriving the minerals and nutrients that this plant needs. But this guy can't make a direct transaction with the fungi or the bacteria. So what's needed is their predator to come along. This guy right here, this is a root-feeding nematode. You only have the root-feeding nematodes in very anaerobic, super compacted soil. So a lot of people have like anti-nematode sprays and stuff like that you can buy at Tractor Supply or whatever your feed and seed place is. That's not the answer to get rid of these guys. You need these guys to be in an inhospitable environment, which is a aerobic soil, which means there's 4 to 6 parts of oxygen per million. That's what you need in your soil. But these guys can't make the direct transaction with your plants until these guys are eaten by your nematode, your protozoa, your arthropods and stuff. Whenever these guys poop out these guys, then you can make the transaction between what this plant needs and what these guys just went and got. The first trophic level is just the plant and the photosynthesis. It produces sugar, puts it down in the soil, feeds these guys. The second trophic level is the decomposing mutualists. Also, all of your pathogens and your parasites and your worms and all that stuff. That's what these guys consist of. Your negative fungi and your beneficial fungi, your negative bacteria and your beneficial bacteria. Now the cool thing about the negative guys is that they all thrive in anaerobic soil. So if we avoid anaerobic soil, then we won't have these parasites or pathogens or anything like that. The third trophic level are the predators of your fungi and your bacteria, and then you move on and you get bigger arthropods and you get bigger nematodes, and then eventually you get your worms, your birds, and all that stuff. So let's go to the next slide and we'll look specifically at the bacteria. So these are some of the common shapes that you will find in your soil. You have the coccus, you have the bacillus, you have variations of these. The coccus and the diplococcus, the bacillus and the diplobacillus are both aerobic beneficial microbes. The streptococcus, that should sound familiar, and the streptobacillus, those are where you start getting into the facultative anaerobes. That's where you start losing oxygen in your soil due to compaction most of the time, or any pesticides or herbicides you're spraying on your soil. Same thing with staphylococcus. There's bacillus with flagellum. That just means they're like a mobile bacteria. They're not really good or bad as far as we know. And then you get over to the really dangerous guys. You get into your spirillum and your spirochetes. These, if you encounter these in your soil, you need to immediately go wash your hands. Because these two plus it's actually not on this one, but your Vibrio, which looks like a comma-shaped bacteria, all those guys are what produce like E. coli. All the negative things in your soil, all the ways your animals get sick are produced by the spirillum, spirochete, and the Vibrio, which aren't on there.
What are reasons?
If you have that in your soil, and you're growing in that soil, does that mean you can get E. coli in your food?
You can get E. coli in your food, and 99% of the time there is E. coli on your food. There's E. coli in you right now. As long as you're healthy, then it doesn't take hold or anything like that. It gets outcompeted by all of these guys, or these 4 guys up here. Your aerobic bacteria. So it's not the end of the world if you have these. Tuft is included in this. This is a facultative anaerobe, so actinobacteria. I don't know if anybody's heard of actinobacteria, but it's what a lot of people take or think is their fungi in their soil. So if you have like real wispy, thin strands of white stuff in your bacteria, if you've ever made compost and you see those white strands in your compost and it's still hot, those are actinobacteria. Now, if you're growing brassicas, you need actinobacteria in order to make that nutrient exchange from what the previous slide, the bacteria and fungi, you need the actinobacteria to actually provide those nutrients to the plant. They actually infect the roots of the plant and get all up inside the roots, and it's like a direct injection of nutrients. But everything else you're growing outside of brassicas do not need that relationship. So, like, depending on what you're growing is going to determine what trophic level you want. Oh, I should get back. Oh. Sorry, y'all. I'm a farmer. I'm not good at computers. There we go. So, depending on what you're trying to grow will determine what kind of ratio you want. So, if you're trying to grow brassicas in your brassica bed, then you want a bacteria-dominant, like right here, you want a bacteria-dominant soil because you need you need that facultative section where it's not completely healthy, but it's not sick either, in order to grow that actinobacteria. But everything else, like you see your pioneer plants, That's really bad soil. The bacteria to fungi ratio is 10 to 1. That's really not good soil. So that's why your pioneer plants come in and they can handle that really crappy soil. So like if you're seeing kudzu grow, if you're seeing like black locust grow, if you're seeing mimosas and stuff, they're doing very well in this section because they're preparing the soil for the next levels over here. So the 10 to 1 ratio on bacteria to fungi is not very good. That's where your weeds, your pioneer plants grow. This 500 to 250 ratio is where your perennial plants and some of your vegetable plants can grow, and then you move to the 1 to 1. That's even better for your veggies and trees. And the further in the progression you go, the more you're getting into like your old growth forests, like super fungi dominant soils. You had a question. What was that?
When you were talking about the bacteria, the really dangerous ones, like what would be common scenarios that those kind of bacteria would show up in your soil? Like if you are composting and you put this in, that's always going to make that kind of bacteria show up. Like, is there specific scenarios where that happens? There
are practices that most everybody does that will create those scenarios. We'll get to that.
Okay, all right,
yeah.
all right.
But yeah, there are. We'll get to at the end of it. We'll get into like what's causing these bad conditions and how we can stop those bad conditions from occurring. So yeah, we went to the bacteria. This is what they look like under the microscope. All of these, if you find the smallest dot possible, like this guy right here, that guy right there, if it was in focus, this is underneath the microscope. This is probably 100x. On a shadowing microscope, you can't just take a regular compound microscope and use it. You need a shadow because a lot of these organisms look like water. So if you don't have a shadow, then you can't see a lot of these organisms. But that's what your bacteria looks like right here, right there. Those are your bacteria. This guy right here is one of the predators of your bacteria. This is a testate amoeba. The inside or the outside of it is a carbon shell, basically. And on the inside, everybody seen Osmosis Jones? Or that might be a little too young, sorry. Osmosis Jones was an amoeba. That little blue guy running around, he was a naked amoeba. He didn't have a shell. But an amoeba is on the inside, and after you shake it up and get it ready for the microscope, it does hide in its shell a little bit, but usually you could see it sprawling out, capturing some bacteria, eating that, and then pooping that out, and then that way the plant can actually uptake those minerals. Here you see a huge filamentous strand that is a fungi right here. You can see the septal wall right here. It's smooth and uniform in diameter, and it's at least 4 to 6 microbes in width. But yeah, and then these guys right here, that's all just organic material, probably fine root hairs that are in direct relationship with your soil food web that's going on all through here. So that's what it looks like under the microscope. It does take a little bit of practice to be able to recognize some of these guys and what's good and what's bad. But that is a good picture. This right here is your fungi. This is what it should look like. Now, for you to be able to see it with your naked eye like that is tens of thousands of these together. So that means you have really strong fungi in your soil. So that's what you want to get. This probably came from a mushroom block. This is very, very rare to find in the soil unless you're in like an old growth, like Pacific Northwest forest that's just been untouched for however many years. So that's the goal. That's what you want, especially if you're growing trees. If you're growing fruits and veggies and all that stuff, then you want a lower trophic level like this right here. Your veggies need to be like a 1-to-1 ratio.
Where does pasture fall?
So pasture falls in, you want it slightly bacteria dominant. Perennial plants and grasses are right here. You want it slightly bacteria dominant. If you progress too quickly, or if you progress past the point that you want, then you're gonna start growing the next succession of plants. This is why pioneer plants and stuff are so beneficial, because they're the ones that can survive these crappy environments, start putting exudates down into the soil, start feeding the soil microbes. As bacteria grows, the predators are going to come in. Same thing above the ground. Like deer, you have a huge deer population, and the wolves come in and they start taming the deer population, and then the wolf population starts getting too big, and then they get disease, and then the deer population grows. Same thing is going on in the soil with the bacteria, fungi, and their predators. So if you're trying to grow grasses, you want slightly bacteria dominant. And if you're trying to grow like hardier, woodier species, then you want more and more fungi in your soil. There's the bacteria, there's the microscope, there's the fungi. Now these are some of the amoebas that are going to eat your fungi and your bacteria. You have testate amoebas, which have this hard shell around them. Inside is the actual amoeba. You have a naked amoeba right here. Looks nothing like Osmosis Jones. You have an Arcella amoeba right here, and then you have some of these guys that have just really ornate shells. But all these are different species of amoeba. And this is important to have, a diversity of soil microbes in your actual soil. If you have just one amoeba, then it's only going to eat one type of bacteria its entire life. And that's not a really good thing, because that bacteria might be only able to, like, let's say that bacteria is really, really good at getting manganese out of the soil and getting it to your plants. Well, your plants need more than just manganese, so you need a diversity of microbes and a diversity of predators that are going to eat those microbes. So there's the testate amoebas. Those are fun to identify just because, I mean, they have all these like super decorative ornate shells. If they get way too decorative or ornate, then it's probably pollen. So you gotta be able to tell the difference on those. Then you also have the cilias and the flagella. Now the cilia, if you're looking under your microscope and you see something just fly by real quick, that's most likely a cilia. These guys love the facultative range. They love the not completely anaerobic, but the slightly aerobic soils. They're not necessarily good. They're an indicator that you have a little bit too much compaction and not enough respiration going on in your soil. The flagella are the good guys of these two. They move very, very slowly. They're a little bumbling through the soil. Yeah, they've got a little wiggle going on because they only have that one little tail. So you just see them wiggling through. They're eating some of the bacteria and some of the fungi as well, some of the smaller filamentous fungi, mostly bacteria, and they're pooping around your plants and fertilizing your plants passively. Then the next one, so these guys are the nematodes. So a lot of people view nematodes in a negative way because they're very, very familiar with the root-feeding nematodes, especially if you grow corn over in like western Oklahoma. A lot of people have issues with root-feeding nematodes, but the root-feeding nematodes only survive in a very sick system. So don't try to make the sick system work, just try a different, healthier system. So see, these are some of the nematodes. This guy right here is a bacteria feeder. You can see his open mouth right here. It's very decorative and ornate right here. And it's more like a, what was that big old worm from Star Wars? It was like in the ground and he had his mouth up. That's basically this guy. He just kind of goes through the soil, picks up whatever he can eat, eats whatever he can, and then moves on. This is a good guy because he's eating a lot of the bacteria, pooping that out, fertilizing your plants. This guy right here is a fungal feeder. So you'll see this spear right here, this tip, that shoots through the wall of the fungi and starts sucking out all the nutrients inside the fungi and then leaving it kind of like an empty shell. Believe it or not, that's a good guy. Because they're, again, causing the nutrient cycling to occur in the soil. This guy right here is the one that everybody hates. This is the root-feeding nematode. Now it has a spear just like your fungal feeder, but because the plant root wall is harder to penetrate than the fungi wall, then it has some backup right here. And I know it's a funny little image right there, but that is how you identify a root-feeding nematode versus a fungi-feeding nematode. These are the bad guys. These only survive in sick conditions. Then we have the omnivore. This guy right here has this tooth right here where it just eats anything. This isn't very good on scale, but this guy right here is so much bigger than all of these guys. This guy right here eats everybody else. So if you think of the bacteria and the fungi feeders right here, think of how much they accumulate in their body. Like all the vitamins and minerals and nutrients and all that stuff, all that they accumulate in their body. As these guys grow in numbers, then these guys start showing up and these guys start eating these guys and start dumping a ton of nutrients into your soil. So you want to keep inviting the predators. This guy, he's an omnivore. He eats whatever as well. He can even eat these guys. He has a spear on there. He's also a switcher. So if conditions go bad, this is like the marauder prepper. He's fine right now, but if things go bad, he'll start eating roots. He'll start knocking doors down and stuff like that. So you want to keep an eye on these guys. Most of the time you see them It was good conditions at one point and then maybe slightly going towards bad conditions. But these guys can be good, they can be bad. These guys are really, really good. You want a bunch of these guys, and these guys are really good too. That's what you're trying to avoid. These only survive in bad conditions. This is what one looks like underneath the microscope, and let's see if we can identify that right there. If anybody can tell me what type of nematode this is, I will give you a knife from the booth over there. Can anybody? There's only like a handful of options. Which one is it? The second one? No.
Is it D?
Is it D? No.
Is that the 2?
We can look at that again.
No.
Well, at this point, y'all, it's a bacteria feeder. It's the first one, A. It's a bacteria feeder. And you can see that it's in this group of aggregates right here. And an aggregate is just where bacteria and fungi have accumulated. They started breaking down inorganic material. And whenever they do that, they create little glues and they create what's called aggregates. So if you look at your soil and you see a bunch of crumb structure, or if you look at like worm castings and you see that perfect crumb structure, that's what that is getting into. And he's getting in there and breaking it up, and he's trying to get to the bacteria that's all up in there. But yeah, that's a bacteria feeder. You can look at the ornate mouth right here. You can open the long esophagus, and then the terminal bulb, and then the stomach right here. And this is all that he's going to poop all that out and fertilize the plants over here.
Can you give us an idea how big is that?
So this is under 100 times magnification. So if you have your eyepiece is usually 10x, and then you have your objectives, which are like 4, 10, and then 100 in my case. The 4, you take the 4 and you multiply that by the eyepiece, so you would get 40x. 10 times the eyepiece, that's 100x, and then 100 times the eyepiece, that's 1000x. You're going to get, or was that right? Yeah. And then, so this is under the 100x, the 10x objective. So as far as the soil microbes go, the nematodes are very, very big. Yeah. Because
You can
like
really kind of almost see it.
that's a bacteria right there. I would need different objectives if I'm trying to identify a specific bacteria. Like a 100x objective won't get you there. This guy shows up even on the 4x. And when you're doing your initial scan through your slide, you can see them wiggling around and moving through your sample and stuff. Yeah, they're massive as far as organisms go. Did you have a question?
And are they very, under the microscope, very snake-like?
Yeah, they're very snake-like. In fact, half the time when I'm trying to identify what kind of nematode it is, I have to take a lighter and flame it real quick just to get them to chill out so I can look at the mouth and figure out what kind of nematode it is. If I do end up flaming it, then I usually have to get another soil dilution prepared, another slide prepared, because it will dry out some of the water. And you have to take all these measurements before the water starts drying out, because that's going to affect your dilutions and everything.
How far,
Go ahead.
how far down?
How far down do you go to take a sample? Now that is a whole class by itself, is how to properly take a sample. Ideally, let's say you have an apple orchard and you're wanting to identify, like, why do I keep getting A, B, C pests in my apple orchard? So I would go to your apple, looking at it from a little bit of a distance, your drip line where the leaves end on your apple and your trunk, go halfway between there and take a apple core, brush away any organic material that you have right there on the surface of your soil. Take your apple core, push it down in there, and then you're going to do the same thing on 3 other random apple trees. It has to be random. So if you need to put, like, let's say you have 36 apple trees on in your paddock, then just pick 3 random apple trees, and that'll give you a good overall judgment of what your soil is looking like. But you want it right in between the drip line and the trunk. Because right up against the trunk, you're going to have more activity because there's more roots right there. On the outside of your drip line, you're going to have a little bit more compaction because of that drip line coming from the leaves and the direct impact from the rain events.
Okay, so for all you're showing for the varieties of amoeba and the bacterium and your anyway, what you're showing, is it universal no matter where you're at in the world?
No matter where you're at in the world.
So you could have all those varieties with your Pacific Northwest, Indiana, Alabama, North Carolina, universal.
This is universal. So if you have, and a lot of people think that this is going to be soil type specific, whether it's clay, silt, or sand, none of that matters. Like, I can't stress that enough. Clay, silt, and sand, none of that matters because they're all gonna go through a process called flocculation, which is what's going on right here. This could be clay, sand, or silt, and it doesn't really matter because the microbes are gonna come over there, attack it, break it down, glue everything together, and create the proper structure that you need in your soil. So you can take, let's say you live in Florida and all your or in the tropics or anything, and all your nutrients just fly through the soil because you have super sandy soil and you can't keep really anything growing or surviving. You can fix that by introducing the proper soil microbes. So it'll retain water when it needs to, it'll wick water when it needs to. The gel structures that are keeping these aggregates together will survive through like severe drought events and anything. If there is a severe drought, then microbes just move down in the soil just a little bit until they get to the proper moisture layers. Was there a question over here? Did I just imagine that? Oh, yeah.
I had one that's kind of, like when you take in the soil sample, you want it to be at kind of some elevation because like, say you're coming down the hillside with a bunch of trees or something, and you get to the bottom of the hill, it levels out, that's where you get into your naturally washed topsoil. So you don't want to go like that on the wind.
You would only test the areas that you're concerned with. So you wouldn't do like a broad test. Because if I take literally just this table, and this picture, this is a raised bed. If I were to take a soil sample from right here on this edge, and I were to take a soil sample from this center right here, I could potentially think that these are completely different locations on your farm. So you want to get a good representative sample for what you're trying to specifically test for. Does that make sense? Okay, gotcha. So that's what a nematode looks like under the microscope. This is what a microarthropod looks like underneath the microscope. So this guy, just for a sense of scale, this is a fungi filamentous right here. These tiny little dots that you see right here, that is bacteria, that's bacteria, and this guy is going through and eating as much as possible. He's eating and he moves very, very quickly. This is another one you have to flame underneath the slide. This guy's going through eating the fungi he can find, eating the bacteria he can find, even eating nematodes if he can fit them in his mouth. So this is very, very progressed soil. Like you're getting into these guys can't show up until your previous organisms have decompacted the soil. If you have compacted soil, then these guys can't even move through the soil or show up. Okay, so that's all the pictures. So let's talk about why your soil is bad to begin with. Ever since we've discovered the ability to till, we've started compacting the soil. Whenever they first started doing it, they would pull it behind a horse or an ox or a mule or something like that, and they would just make a very, very shallow compaction layer, and they'd probably only do it once, maybe even twice a year, but very, very minimal, and it was only when they absolutely had to at the beginning of every year, which gave the soil a long time to rest. And also, those are very, very lightweight compared to modern day mechanics and stuff. So it's not creating that deep of a compaction layer, and it's not creating that hard of a compaction layer. Up to 320 PSI about is what roots can break through. As long as you're underneath that, if you're less than that, the roots can eventually make it past the compaction layer and decompact the soil. Anything above that, your roots are out of luck, and you're creating this just concrete-like structure that the roots can't pass, the microbes can't pass, or anything like that. There's no limit to how deep proper soil can go. Like it can go 11 feet, it can go 20 feet. We used to have, 20-some feet of topsoil in North America? All that's gone. There's no limit to how deep good soil can be. So we started with the tilling, we started pulling it behind a horse, and then we started using mechanized methods and started tilling deeper. All that's doing is creating the compaction layer even deeper in the soil, making it even harder to eventually fix it. With the mechanical machines that we're using to till and stuff, it's even like higher in PSI as far as the amount of pressure that is pushing down on that compaction layer. So if you till, let's say you till 2 feet deep, 24 inches, that 25th inch is concrete. That's something your roots can't penetrate, even perennials. Even if annuals, even if you're growing annuals, they should be able to grow deeper than 2 feet deep. Their roots should go, there shouldn't be no limit to how deep the roots can go, even if they're annuals. If they're perennials, then there really shouldn't be a limit on how deep the roots can go. So that compaction layer is really, really the issue. And then the deeper we start tilling, the deeper we start putting that compaction layer, and that's an issue. The other reason we have horrible soil is because of the like the herbicides, the pesticides, the nitrogen-based fertilizers that we're putting down. All of this stuff is killing the soil microbes. You might think that the nitrogen-based fertilizers are fine, but what you're putting down are salts. Rome salted Carthage back in those, I can't remember the dates or anything like that, but they put down salt in Carthage, and to this day they cannot grow. They made sure they can never grow food there again. So that's how bad the salts are. So like whenever it rains, it might not seem bad at first, but when you're killing your microbes, you're removing the soil's ability to fertilize your plants without any human intervention. As soon as you start fertilizing or throwing down pesticides or herbicides or anything like that, you're now making it mandatory for human intervention over and over and over again. And the more you do it, the more you're stuck on that loop. So if you throw down some 30-30-30, you are going to kill all the microbes in the soil because it's too alkaline, they can't survive in that situation. And you're going to directly fertilize that plant just once. How many of us just need to eat once? None of us. Yeah. So the plants are going to constantly need more and more food, which the soil microbes are providing already by themselves. So we just need to not panic and fertilize. Go ahead.
How about fertilizers like blood meal, bone meal?
So blood meal and bone meal, those are, you can add those depending on what they're suspended in, like what kind of matrix that they're suspended in. A lot of the times they are suspended, depending on where you get them from. If you make them yourself, then you're good to go. But if you get them from some big box stores, they're probably coming with some sort of preservative or some sort of additive, which is going to be a salt. So if you add that to your soil, it's going to feed a very specific type of microbes, like most likely bacteria is what you're going to get out of the blood meal and the bone meal. You can do that if you want to, but as soon as that water on the surface dries up, what's left behind is a salt. So the more you do that, the more the salt is going to accumulate, and then the more alkaline your soil is going to be, which is the opposite effect that you want. The pH, don't worry about like pH tests or anything like that. All of that will be determined by the bacteria. They know exactly what kind of pH they want. And also it's going to be like literally, if I took a soil sample right here and I took another soil sample just 1/10 of a centimeter, like 1 millimeter away from it, they're going to have different pH levels because there's different microbes within that little space. The microbes are going to determine the pH, and the pH is a very, very site-specific thing. Like the pH on this aggregate right here is going to be different than the pH on this aggregate right here. And it's all good. That's a good thing. Because it's like different minerals are going to require a different pH level to actually like derive from the aggregates.
Now, since you depressed me, why don't you give me something that's gonna lift me up?
All right, so now that you guys are all sad and depressed, how do we fix this? Okay, let's say hypothetically you bought an old cornfield, probably was ridden with pesticides, herbicides, and super compacted, about 25 inches deep. What are the steps you need to take to actually fix that? The first thing you need to do is stop spraying everything. Don't spray anything anymore. Unless it's compost teas and extracts, but we'll get to that in a second. The first thing you need to do is decompact the soil. So there's only 2 ways to decompact the soil using mechanical means, without causing a compaction layer beneath that. The first one is a hand tool called a broad fork. It's just it's almost like a pitchfork that you can jump on, and it's a little bit wider, and then you can pull back and decompact the soil that way. The issue with that, though, is that it doesn't reach those deeper compaction layers. Another way to do it, and this is by using a tractor, you can use a yeoman's plow, which is a subsoiling plow. It goes down beneath the soil, and it does not create a compaction layer beneath that plow. So that is a safe way to go. The broad fork is a safe way to go. The broad fork usually applies to your garden and stuff like that. Your yeoman's plow is going to apply to like cattle pasture. It can apply to large-scale row crops. Try to avoid monoculture if you can. It's going to apply to those larger scale aspects. But that's how you decompact the soil that way. Another thing you can do, because all of your microbes are vacant from that area, because they've been sprayed and compacted and killed, and you have like all the bad microbes at this point. You need to start making compost and compost teas and compost extracts. Now, I got a question from yesterday's class, and they were asking, like, how far does the compost actually go? Like, you make one compost pile, like, how far does that go? Because quickly you're going to start piling up compost as you're doing the chicken tractor on steroids. So if you use a compost pile just as straight up compost, like you just add it to your raised beds, and like that's all you get out of it is a planting substrate, then you're not using it to the best of its abilities. You can use that compost to make compost teas and extracts. A tea is, you basically put it in a big jug, about 30 gallons, and then you add air to it. And you constantly let the air oxygenate the ground, or oxygenate the water, and you let the soil microbes replicate and multiply within that water. You also give them some sort of food. It depends on what you're trying to do. That all is determined by what you're trying to do, like the food you give it, how long you let it go, and all that type of stuff. It also depends on the state of your compost before you started the tea. An easier route you could go is compost extract. The way you make compost extract is you take a handful of your compost, your proper compost, you put it in a 400 micron bag, and then you just dunk it in a 5-gallon bucket for about 30 seconds. And your goal is to strip the microbes off the compost and get it suspended in that water. Don't do any finer than 400 micron, because then you will be filtering out your beneficial microbes, the ones that you actually want in the water and stuff. So make sure it's not 400 micron. Cheesecloth is a little bit too big of holes for your sprayer and stuff, so avoid the cheesecloth as well. Do you have a question? Oh, no? Okay, sorry. And then you're going to apply that directly to your soil. You can use compost extracts and teas as a drench, or you can use it as a foliar spray. Whatever your application, you can either spray it or drench it, it doesn't really matter. If you're going to drench it, then make sure you hit it with the yeoman's plow or the broad fork first. If you're doing a yeoman's plow to decompact, then make sure you have no more than 2 feet between trenches. So that way, as you apply the compost extract, it's going to sink down into the soil past the compaction layer, and it'll make a connection between the other microbes that you dropped off just 2 feet away and completely decompact that area. Go ahead.
I went up to my implement dealer in Crossville, Tennessee, and I said I want a subsoil. So he gave me a subsoil. Is that a yeoman's plow that he gave me, or because it's very small
Yeah.
down where it goes?
Yeah.
I got the right thing.
It sounds like you got the right thing. Yeah, if you tell them a subsoiler, it's most likely going to be a yeoman's plow. A yeoman's plow is just a design. Go ahead.
We grew up in farmland, and always, cotton, all the way back to the Civil War days. This looks like it worked fine on, say, if you had a 30 by 30 garden spot. What would you do when you have a 40-acre pasture, and without setting up like a chemical lab where your ATM agents are worried about what you make?
Right.
What would you do with 40 acres?
So with 40 acres, I would treat it the same way that I would that original corn crop. The first thing I would do is, you have other options other than trying to build the soil down. Like you could build the soil up, but you're always going to be limited by that lowest compaction layer. I would run it through with the yeoman plow. This is where keyline design comes into play, which is just another tool within the permaculture toolbox. You're going to go downhill 2% towards the ridge lines with your yeoman's plow. Deep, you want to subsoil past the compaction layer. So if it was cotton, when did they stop growing cotton?
Well, Woodlock Farm, just 2 years prior, was actually soybean. So
Oh, the soybean?
it's clay as well. So
Okay. I would try to find out how deep they've ever tilled, like what's the deepest they've ever tilled. You can also take a stick, start pounding it into the ground, like a rod or a ground rod, and start pounding it in the ground. And then you'll know when you hit the compaction layer.
Well, right now we have the pioneer species, say like green sage and stuff like that. And well, we have soil scientists that actually live within a mile of us. I call him today, what I need to do to get better grass. Well, of course, he comes out and says, well, you need 40 tons of lime, and then after that, we'll wait a year, and then you're gonna need 40 tons of phosphorus and this and that. I'm like, well, you're going the opposite direction.
Yeah.
What we want to do.
Yeah, if you start applying lime to your pastures, you'll start creating concrete.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
which is going to increase the compaction, which is going to be the opposite effect that you want. So yeah, forget that guy. Get it. See if you can.
I'm not trying to prove a point, I'm trying
Exactly. Yep. No matter what you're trying to grow, you need to decompact the soil. You need to give the roots especially if you're growing grasses, there's no limit on how deep perennial grasses can grow. The only limit is the compaction layer or bedrock. That's another limit. But like, especially if you're growing perennial grasses, you need to decompact that soil as best as possible. So renting a yeoman's plow or even like buying one, whatever your options are, getting that decompacted, go below their lowest tilled area. So if they went 24 inches, decompact up to 25 inches. And then after that, you can let it go and just graze correctly. It's important to graze correctly or else you're going to create another compaction layer. Graze correctly, and then the microbes will eventually make its way down, or you can make compost teas and extracts, drench your field, and just immediately inoculate those areas with the proper microbes. And this, by doing that, you will increase the amount of weight that the animals put on. You will eliminate any pests or diseases that the animals might get. You will have higher fertility rates with your animals because they're eating proper food. It's the same thing as you. Like when you eat like crap, you feel like crap. When you eat really, really healthy and really, really clean and good, then you feel amazing and you don't have any of these issues. It's amazing the similarities between the soil and the human gut. You want to keep it in proper conditions. Like, you need to keep it aerobic. If you go anaerobic, you start developing cancers. If the soil goes anaerobic, it starts developing vibrios and spirochetes and spirillas and all that stuff. The anaerobic bacteria, the bad guys, all the disease and pathogens and stuff. So, decompact it first with a yeoman's plow, and then graze correctly on top. Or spray it with compost teas and extracts, and then still graze correctly. Because if you don't graze correctly, you're going to create a shallower compaction layer, and if you're rehabilitating like old cattle land or anything like that, the compaction layer is going to be much shallower. So it's easier to deal with versus like the old school tillers and everything.
So on your compost tea, if you made, I've kind of watched Dad do it, and he said that, once you get it really going good, you like to take it out, and you can dilute it by, 10, 20.
Yeah, you can dilute it up to 20 times. Yeah.
That way, I guess you could get over a 40-acre spot with a good dose of it,
You could honestly fertilize an entire 40 acres with one really good biocomplete compost spot. Now, some of the methods of making compost, there's a bunch of different options. There's the 18-day Berkeley method of making compost. There's the 30-day chicken checker on steroids method of making compost. There's cold compost options. I would avoid the cold compost options because in a hot compost system, you're going through a thermophilic phase. So where it reaches really, really high temperatures for a certain period of time. If you reach those high temperatures, the aerobic varieties love those high temperatures. The anaerobic guys hate those high temperatures. So they all die off, all the pathogens die off, all the weed seeds are killed, and then you have really good, clean compost. So avoid the cold composting methods because you're giving the potential of just breeding the bad guys, especially if it goes anaerobic within the soil and the center. So stick to the hot composting methods, the 18-day compost, the 30-day compost. It's gonna take work, but if you do it properly, it doesn't take as much work and you don't have to do it as often. So get those guys squared away, and then once it reaches, this is an important step, let it come to ambient temperature. So get a really good compost thermometer and let the center of that compost come to ambient temperature. Once it comes to ambient temperature, then you're gonna start growing your fungi and everything. So if you're using your compost teas and extracts or straight up compost for your trees, then you really need that fungi layer to build up. So let it come to ambient temperature, and then you're good to go. You can start applying it directly if you want to.
So that 1 cubic yard would really take care of a 40-acre spot.
Yeah, I mean, that 1 cubic yard could potentially take care of that 40-acre spot. You just have to make sure that 1 cubic yard is really, really good compost.
Make good stuff.
Yeah, and here's another cool thing. So after you use that handful of compost in your compost teas and extracts, you can throw that handful back in your compost and let it get re-inoculated. So it's like an endless loop. You will get to a point, if you don't use your compost within 3 months of manufacturing it, you will get to a point where the microbes just start running out of food and start lowering in numbers, and it's no longer biocomplete, which is a term that Dr. Elaine Ingham developed, and it's just a standard, like, this is perfect soil. If it's biocomplete, this is perfect soil. If I were to take a gram of perfect soil, and I were to look at the volume and the weight of it, half of it should be soil organisms. And the other half is just inorganic material. but the other half should be living soil organisms. That's what perfect compost or perfect soil looks like. So yeah, that's why it is so important to focus on making good compost. Like the backbone of your entire farm is going to be whether or not you can make good compost. You don't have good gardeners, you have good compost makers. You don't have good farmers, you have good compost makers. Even if all you do is graze, if that's all you do, you're still making compost because the animal goes through, eats the grass, it poops that out. Anytime you have an interaction between carbon and nitrogen, you're starting the composting cycle. So, go ahead.
I have a question about the water source.
Yes.
I have city water.
Mhm.
I, of course, could do other methods, but I don't have a well.
Yep.
What does that chlorine in that city water do to
Yeah.
all that we're trying to accomplish?
Okay, so what do I do about chlorine in the water supply? And that's a super easy fix, and I'm so glad there is, but you just add humic acid until the color changes. Yeah, so just put, like if you were to spray water into a bucket, fill up the bucket with water, and then just add a couple drops of humic acid until the color changes. You'll notice an immediate change. It won't smell like chlorine anymore. It'll wipe out chlorine and was it chlorinate? Both of them. It'll wipe out both of them, and then you're good to go.
Yeah.
Or the other option is you could add vitamin C to it. That's another option. Or you could just let the bucket sit for a long time and let everything off gas, and then you can use it. But everybody has the option for rainwater collection.
Yeah, I have a drip system,
Okay.
and so I just need to do something before it starts to drip.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So to understand properly, you're saying the compost, it'll get hot, and then after its own, don't that process will come down to ambient temperature or something?
Yes, it will. So yeah, your compost is going to go through a cycle where it gets, so in the 18-day method of or I should say Elaine Ingham's version of making an 18-day compost, you're going to assemble your pile. And depending on what time of year is going to determine the components of your pile. But you're going to assemble your pile, you're going to let it reach to at least 135 degrees. If it goes between 135 and 145, then it sits there for 3 days. Above 145 to 155, then it's going to sit there for 2 days. 155 to 175, then it's going to sit there for 24 hours. If it goes above 175, immediately disassemble it because it could potentially catch fire. Because the center is producing alcohol vapors, and at that temperatures, you can light those alcohol vapors on fire. So after that takes care of the core of the compost pile. So you take the top off, you put it off to the side. You take the core off, you put that off to the side. And then you start building your new pile. So the top is going to become your bottom. The bottom is going to become your core. And that previous middle, your core, is going to become the top. And you want to do that for all 3 sections. Make sure you eliminate all pathogens, all weed seeds, all of that. And then after that, you're going to set it off to the side, let it come to ambient temperature. Everything's just kind of like relaxing. Like the food is kind of dying down a little bit. Everybody's balancing out. Everybody's relaxing. And then you're good to go, and then you can use it. Go ahead.
How do you feel about Johnson soup?
How do I feel about Johnson Soup bioreactor, the compost thing?
Yes.
From what I've seen, it doesn't seem to be getting hot enough to wipe out the pathogens and the weed seeds. Now, that doesn't mean that the pathogens won't be outcompeted by like all the aerobic bacteria, because like at a certain level, the anaerobic guys just can't survive in super oxygenated soil, like cancer can't survive in super oxygenated body. So yeah, Johnson Soup, it depends on your starting materials. Like if you're using a lot of like weeds, like that you chop down, like paddock mulch and stuff, then I probably wouldn't use the Johnson Soup bioreactor. But if you're using just straight up like garden stuff, and then like garden waste and chicken manure and all that type of stuff, then probably not a bad idea. I thought for a second you were gonna ask about Jadam.
Well, that's another one. So
Yeah.
I'm using that like half, 3/4 of a 55-gallon drum.
Uh-huh.
New growth, grasses, weeds.
So the Jadam method, on the face of it, doesn't make much sense to me because it focuses heavily on those anaerobic fertilizers and pest control and all that stuff, and it seems to be anaerobic, which seems to be counterproductive to the aerobic environment that you're trying to produce, and also seems to be getting you stuck on that constant additive loop, that constant input loop, where you're having to constantly add things to the soil so your plants can survive. I think now I'm not saying it doesn't work. I don't know for sure if it does or not, but I will say it's not as efficient as this method. Well, you know what I mean. as the methods we just talked about. Instead of constantly having to add things to your soil, I can just do one permanent fix, make sure I don't break any of the rules of compaction or fertilizer or pesticide or anything like that, and then it should be good to go. Go ahead.
On a pasture, I've got a horse pasture, how often do I need to be adding the extracts or the tea?
So how often do I need to be adding the extracts or the tea? This is where the soil test comes in handy. Usually within 3 applications at most, you can have biocomplete soil or the proper levels that you need, the proper bacteria to fungi levels that you need. The issue with the horse pasture is you're not rotating them, are you?
Yeah, I'm rotating.
By rotating, I mean, are you rotating them every 3 days?
Yes.
Oh, you are? Oh, good. So yeah, they're not causing much compaction at all. So that would, yeah, if you properly rotated them, and you did like 1 or 2 or 3 applications of this compost tea at the proper times, you want to do it right before it rains, so that way you're not having your microbes dry out. You don't want to do it in the dead of summer, like in the middle of August or drought, because your microbes are going to need water. And you also want that water to carry those microbes down into the soil or downstream or wherever you're trying to set it. But yeah, usually between 1 to 3 applications is good to go, as long as you don't break any of the rules that we talked about before with the compaction or the herbicides or pesticides. So, does anybody else? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Okay, so I'll do the first one first. What are my thoughts on worm castings? Worm castings are absolutely awesome. Super high in bacteria though. So it depends on what kind of ratio you're going for. If you're trying to grow trees and stuff, then you're better off inviting the worms to your trees instead of adding worm castings there. But you can dilute them. I mean, they're perfect for your garden and everything. The downside of the cool thing about worms, I'll start with that. The cool thing about worms is everything that they touch becomes beneficial. It's amazing. It's like they have the Midas touch. Everything they touch becomes beneficial. The downside is that they don't eat seeds, or they don't wipe out seeds. So if you throw like a